And I'd like to give the floor to Dmytro Kukhniuk. I respect Dmytro as a colleague, as a professional, and since he started to chair the national service of the mediation and peace settlement, basically this launched a new page in labor mediation in Ukraine. Over to you, Dmytro. Thank you, Luisa. Dear participants of International Conference, I am Dmytro Kukhniuk. I am the chair of the National Service of Mediation and Settlement, or Conciliation Service is another way we call ourselves. I also teach at the Department of Law of Kiev National University of Shevchenko. I've been teaching there for 26 years. So I'd like to present to you the participants of our panel today. You see them on the screen right now. We will be discussing mediation at workplace, from collective labor disputes down to personal disagreements. I'm glad to welcome John Sturrock, the founder and the chief mediator of Global Solutions. He's the leading mediator of Great Britain. He is global leader of thoughts, Who's Who Legal, according to Who's Who Legal. Then we have Fidana Alieva, accredited mediator of Asian Bank of Development.
Weinstein
She is also the founder of Negotiations. She is the founder of the Center for Mediation and Negotiation, mediation trainer for the Consensus, IAM Campus. Also, I'd like to welcome my colleagues from Ukraine, Sergiy Savchuk, project manager at the ILO country office for Ukraine, as well as the UN Agency for the World of Work. Next, Sergii Bilenkyi, deputy chairman of the joint representative body of the employer's side at the national level, and deputy chairman of the Council of the Federation of Employers of Ukraine. And last but not least, Oleksandr Shubin, Vice President of Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine. According to our agenda, I would like to give first the floor to John Sturrock, and would like to remind everyone that our time is limited. So please, let's agree that you have 12 minutes for your presentation. And after all panelists have made their presentations, we will have a short Q&A session. We expect some questions from the audience. So first, I'd like to give the floor to John Sturrock.
Thank you very much, Dmytro. I confess that I understood that I had up to 15 minutes to speak, so I'll try to get through this as quickly as I can. However, first of all, I bring you all greetings from Edinburgh in Scotland. I'm very honoured to be asked to give this talk at such an important conference. I'm also very aware of how little I know of the circumstances in which you are all working as mediators or otherwise in the field of conflict resolution. So I approach my contribution with humility. What I hope I can do is to offer some observations from my own knowledge based on many years working as a mediator and facilitator in the broadest sense, working in all sorts of commercial, workplace, business policy, and other disputes, conflicts, and difficult situations. I've started with that broad definition of what I do because I think it's important to view what we do in an expansive way, offering our skills and expertise as broadly as we can when people need the help of an independent, credible and trusted third party to help them to deal with whatever tough situations they may be experiencing. Now, I've referred to working as a mediator and facilitator, as one lesson I have learned is that sometimes, perhaps particularly in workplace conflict, the word mediator and the expression mediation can actually be a deterrent to those who have difficulties they wish to resolve. For whatever reason, these words can have a negative impact. That negative impact can, I know, be addressed by adopting different language, such as describing the process as one of facilitating conversations or assisting with dialogue. This is a classic example of reframing the language to meet the needs of the situation. So this is very easy to say, but how we describe what we do is really important. Can I just say that for those taking notes, I'll be very happy to make the text of my talk available later. My own experience of workplace conflicts has covered a wide range of situations. These include being asked by my government here in Scotland to conduct a review of serious allegations of bullying and harassment in the workplace in an organisation which provides healthcare in the largest geographic area in my country. That was an extensive 4-month task involving nearly 300 employees with very public consequences. My experience has also included mediating among the senior members of large organisations who have reached the point where they no longer trust each other, and as a result, the organisations can no longer function effectively. In these, very senior managers, chief executive, boards of trustees, or directors and other key individuals may all be involved. My work has also included family businesses where, for example, intergenerational conflict has created an impasse in the management of the business and a very sad breakdown in personal relationships among family members, affecting the workplace. It also includes the relatively simple situation of employees not being able to work together. And it includes the classic employer-employee disputes where mediation offers an alternative to a judicial or other adjudicative process. This week, I've been working with the chairpeople of 2 local community organisations who are moving slowly towards a joint meeting of their boards, possibly with senior managers. There are significant workplace issues to be addressed. The impact at a local level of the absence of communication and the loss of trust between these organisations has seriously impacted the whole community. In nearly all of these situations, while the facts may be very different, the same underlying themes occur. Issues which are profoundly human, personality differences, lack of or poor understanding among different people, lack of or poor communication, ineffective or non-existent communication amongst key people, breakdowns of trust, and fear of loss of status, loss of face, loss of respect, fear of being found at fault or being held responsible for things going wrong, fear of being criticized or blamed. People become defensive, angry, aggressive, positional, and unable to find creative ways forward. Stress, illness, low morale, and poor productivity can be the result. Now, we know that most of these situations are capable of resolution by the process that we call mediation or facilitation. So, what lessons have I learned? In this talk, I'm going to offer 10 very practical tips and techniques. Number 1, we need to be flexible. There's no one correct way of doing this. There are the basics, of course, but you need to be prepared to design a process for the particular needs of the situation. It's a bit like jazz music. We may know the notes to play, but we may need to improvise in playing them. For me, that usually means firstly meeting privately, whether in person or online, with all the key players to find out what they're thinking, what the real issues are, and what they need, to build confidence in the process, and in me as mediator or facilitator, and to begin to work out what to do next. I often have a series of such initial meetings and then prepare a short summary, being careful to preserve confidentiality, with suggestions for the next steps, which I share with the people involved. Secondly, number two, that may lead me to need to work with various combinations of people. Perhaps in contrast with many commercial mediations, there's not a fixed formula for how the meetings will go. With some more complicated workplace situations, I may effectively have a series of mini mediations to help to move things forward. The mediator's role will be to map out the most effective order in which to have these meetings and to think about where, when, who, and how for each one. And as an aside, if lawyers are involved, don't be afraid to bring the key people together without lawyers present if you think that this will help to move matters forward. I do this regularly. Turning to my third tip, preparation strategies are important, obviously for us as mediators, but also for the parties. I frequently send a set of questions to parties a week or two in advance of the mediation meetings and ask them to think about these questions and indeed to write out a response so that when we reach the mediation day, I can ask the parties to work through the questions and answers together, taking one at a time. Hearing the answers of other parties can be quite a revelation and provide deep insights for all the parties and may indeed lead to much better understanding. Now, these questions include, just by way of an example, what would you like to achieve out of this process of meeting together? If you achieved this, what would that mean for you? What do you need to do to help to achieve this? What do you need to say to help to achieve this? What do you need to hear from others which would help you? What are your main concerns at this stage? What do you think might be the main concerns of others? What do you think that others may wish to achieve out of this? What can you say or do which will help others? What are likely to be the areas of common ground? If you're going to work together in the future, what needs to be done specifically? Excuse me. If you're not going to work together, what will be the consequences for you? What will be the consequences for them? And finally, what have you learned about yourself in answering these questions? So that's number 3 in my practical techniques. Number 4, the mediator will often need to adopt the role of coach. This may mean helping the parties to consider how they will approach the process as a whole or a particular stage or meeting in particular. This can be particularly helpful in the kind of interpersonal conflicts which are typical of workplace disputes. To take a recent example, I was working with a party which has a serious dispute about workplace and governance issues with another party and had reached the end of the road. The only way forward seemed to be a very damaging public breakup. However, getting into coaching mode, I invited the party to put itself or themselves excuse me, in the shoes of the other party and its senior manager, and to try to imagine what would be concerning them most. I introduced what is my most used mediation tool, AARREE. You can find out more about this in my podcast on the core website. And we worked through the various stages: acknowledgement, acceptance, recognition, reassurance, engagement, explanation, in short. Now, that process led to the drafting of a letter which has the potential to change things quite significantly for the better. So, while we mediators don't provide solutions to the substantive issues, it is certainly our job to provide guidance to the parties on how to negotiate. Turning to my 5th point, taking this a little bit further, I believe that introducing some of the concepts which we understand through study of the brain, our understanding of neuroscience in particular, can be very powerful in tense workplace disputes. For example, telling parties about how we are all easily affected by confirmation bias or reactive devaluation, just to take 2 illustrations of mental shortcuts, can be very powerful. There are many of these to consider. In fact, if you look at my wall, there's what's called the Cognitive Bias Codex, and that's the over 100 cognitive biases that influence us in the work that we do. But just selecting 1 or 2 of these to talk about in language that the parties understand can make a real difference. I like to use visual aids to help illustrate some of these points. Again, if you look at my wall, you should see, I hope, I'll just see if I can make sure that you can all see this. The piece of cheese behind me there is an illustration of seeing different sides of a story. So this piece of cheese is a useful reminder that different people see different things from different perspectives. I will often draw that up on a flip chart or point to this when I'm mediating online. Each perspective, of course, is equally valid from that person's point of view. When discussing this, I will usually also say that I make no assumptions except one, that everyone is trying their best in the circumstances in which they find themselves, and I invite the parties to do the same. So that's the fifth point, neuroscience, cognitive biases, and bringing that into the process of mediation. Sixth point, I often make these points, the points I've been describing, and provide these illustrations when everyone meets together for breakfast at the start of the mediation day. So let me add this suggestion. Create opportunities for parties to eat together. This is not possible if you're mediating online, of course, but if you are meeting in person, the psychologist will tell us that sharing a meal or just simple refreshments together can change the personal dynamics. So nearly always in my mediations, after meeting with the parties separately to start the day, I invite them, when we're meeting in person, to join me for some pastries and coffee or whatever has been provided. By doing this, you help to humanize people who may have become dehumanized by what has happened previously. This won't always be appropriate or possible, but do keep it in mind. Recently, a lawyer said to me that the effect that this simple strategy had on his clients and the relationship with the other party was really significant in breaking down barriers and influencing the whole mediation process that followed. Number 7, the use of well-known devices, the well-known devices of batnas and watnas, can be particularly helpful in some workplace situations where people seem reluctant to reach agreement. Encouraging the parties to work out in some detail exactly what will happen if agreement is not reached provides a very useful objective benchmark to help them to assess any proposals which are made. To take the very simple example for an employee of deciding whether to stay or leave their present employment, researching what other jobs are available and with what salary and conditions provides just such a benchmark. Similarly, for an employer, whether to encourage an employee to stay in their current role or be redeployed can be weighed against the cost and time of adversarial proceedings, with all the other stress and damage which that may entail. Number 8, I've learned over the years that we need to resist the instinct and the parties urging to put the money aspects of the dispute first. It is much easier, in my experience, to deal with the financial claims and costs after you address the other issues. And there are always other issues. It's not about what it's about, as someone once said. Financial claims are often the symptom of a deeper underlying cause or problem. They're often a substitute for other needs that people have, sometimes unrecognized. You need to explore all of this. For example, recognition of someone's contribution to the work of the employer, placing value on who they are as a person, possibly an apology for things that have gone wrong, agreeing the terms of a future reference. All of these can make a big difference to someone who has perhaps felt undervalued in their role as an employee. Remember too, that there may be an asymmetry between the parties' needs. What matters a lot to one party may be relatively easy for the other party to give, and vice versa. 9. When an agreement is reached, there may be a conventional signed settlement agreement. However, often what is agreed in workplace situations is more fluid than that. Perhaps a new way of working or a protocol for future behavior. You may need to work on framing this with the parties, and there may also be a need to report the outcome to others in the organization, such as an HR professional. The key is to check that you have the agreement of the parties to every step along the way, and to ensure that confidentiality is always respected. And finally, number 10, as workplace conflicts will often be about ongoing relationships, it can be useful to build in a follow-up opportunity in which you, as the mediator or facilitator, check in with the parties about how things are going, say after 3 months, or at least offer them the opportunity to contact you should they wish to do so. In my experience, this follow-up doesn't actually happen very often, but the availability of the mediator may be all that is needed as a form of insurance policy to make sure that whatever has been agreed is actually adhered to. So there we are. These are my 10 tips and techniques. Thank you very much for listening.
Джон, дуже дякуємо вам за таку надзвичайно цікаву і чітко структуровану доповідь. У нас буде можливість...
We're going to have an opportunity after we'll have listened to all the speakers to ask questions. And we're going to encourage you to give answers to our participants. I can see in the chat people started asking questions, which is brilliant. Hopefully the organizers will take stock of all of them and then share with us. And now it is my pleasure and honor to give the floor to Fidana Alieva. I know she has the presentation, so please, will you be able to share it?
Thank you, Dmytro, for your warm welcome. I hope I'm audible. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I will share my screen myself, please, if it's possible. First of all, I would like to thank Louisa and Svetlana for organizing this outstanding forum and inviting me as a speaker, and for their significant contribution to the field of mediation worldwide. So the topic of my presentation relates to preventive mediation. Why did I choose this topic? Every conflict, even a small one, matters. As a mediator specializing in commercial, workplace, and family business disputes and conflicts, I can say that workplace conflict, they extend beyond workplace environment, not simply affecting overall health, performance, productivity. I have witnessed cases when internal issues within one company negatively impacted their business relationships with the other company, causing a business conflict. So the best time to resolve a conflict is before it begins. And let me begin with a real case, one of the cases I worked on. Every case is individual sometimes. So I had cases in my practice when we spent 1 hour for mediation session, and within 1 hour parties were done. And this is another example. So an employee, a young woman, a single mother, was wrongly terminated and initiated mediation. The other party, represented by the embassy, agreed to mediate. During mediation, they reached a mutually acceptable agreement, even though this young woman had to leave the company, but she resigned voluntarily. She received a recommendation letter, she received compensation. Mediation in total took 2 months. They paid 1,500 fees in euros. They did not involve any external lawyers. The embassy was represented by an internal lawyer, and the young woman did not involve any. But what is the cost of conversation never had? And this is a comparison between 3 steps of the framework I'm going to share with you today. Resolution mediation, preventive mediation, and collaboration mediation. And you can see the difference between the expenses and time spent. So what is preventive mediation? Preventive mediation is the use of mediation techniques before any conflict escalates into a formal disputes. It's about addressing tensions, misunderstandings during changes in the company or organizations, during onboardings, restructures, etc., before they become entrenched problems. And this is a framework I use in my mediation practice when dealing with workplace cases, and I recommend my clients, namely organizations and companies, to use this framework and integrate it into their organizational culture and environment. The first step is alignment mediation, and this is a fully preventive mechanism. Alignment mediation is about clarity, healthy communication habits before issues arise. Alignment mediation is utilized during onboardings, team transitions, periodic check-ins. Its main focus is on culture building and risk reduction. At this stage, mediators help parties to facilitate discussions between them to align their expectations, values, working styles. Alignment mediation also helps to identify communication gaps, those communication gaps that potentially can lead to a formal dispute in future. They help to identify potential friction points at early stage. The next step is collaboration mediation. So during alignment mediation, parties learned about mediation, what it is, how it works, how to use and integrate mediation techniques into their workplace environment. And at this stage, when there are some tensions, when there are some misunderstandings between them, they're able to use those techniques. They're able to manage the issues between them independently, not involving any external mediator. So they're able to address the issues directly. This is a partially preventive mechanism. And the next step is resolution mediation, classic mediation we are all familiar with. The important thing to mention about these two first steps, that these are the stages where listening really works. Those who are practicing mediators, you know how much efforts we as practitioners put during resolution mediation to encourage parties to listen to each other. And at these two stages, meaning alignment mediation and collaboration mediation, they listen to each other. They are willing to listen and to understand each other. So you do not have to put any extra efforts to encourage them to listen to each other. Why this framework is not utilized enough? The first reason is conflict avoidance culture. So people think that one day it will go away anyway. It won't. People fear difficult conversations. But as for alignment stage, these conversations, they are not difficult. Maybe they are challenging to some extent, but they are not difficult at all because there is no any conflict yet. Another reason is that many organizations and companies experience lack of internal mechanisms to organize this early dialogue. Sometimes it's about time, but preventive mediation is worth of investing time into it. And another reason is lack of neutrality. So people, employees, they may not trust internal channels. Imagine that it's an HR or another person from HR department who is in charge of dealing with workplace issues, but still it is a teammate, it's a colleague, and they may assume that this colleague may take sides. So that's why in this regard, external mediators are more welcomed. But preventive mediation should be utilized because of its benefits. And they are very simple. The first one I've already mentioned, it's about its efficiency in terms of time spent and resources spent. Alignment mediation helps to build and preserve trust. And it's very important, especially when, let's say, it's an onboarding person of a new staff member. Trust is something that is very important in any communication. And here, during alignment mediation stage, a mediator helps to understand each other working style, to accommodate those working style and integrate them into workplace environment so they understand each other, they understand communication context of each other, and they're comfortable with working with one another. Another huge benefit of preventive mediation is psychological safety. It really contributes a lot to psychological safety because employees feel heard. It's quite comfortable for them to have those conversations beforehand when there is no any formal dispute or conflict. As mediators, as professionals, we need to put our efforts to promote preventive mediation. How can we do that? First, of course, we need to train leaders in basic mediation skills so they are able to recognize those early signs that can potentially lead to formal conflict in future. Early stage consultations, I call them conflict health checks, we can provide them in the form of questionnaires, internal surveys, employees' feedback, etc., etc. And of course, we need to build long-term relationships with organizations, with entities, not just one-off interventions when there is already a conflict. And what I can definitely say, based on my experience and my practice, it is easier to promote mediation when there is no conflict, because people are not in stress. They are able to analyze, to perceive, to understand, to ask good questions. So it's easier to promote mediation when they are not in conflict. And they absorb this mediation culture. And then when there is a conflict, it will be easier for them to apply resolution mediation. So an ounce of prevention is worth of a pound of cure. And the key idea I would like to conclude my presentation with is that preventive practices promote a mediation culture. Once this mediation culture is embedded in organizational setting, the first approach when conflict arises is resolution mediation. So by promoting preventive mediation, we promote resolution mediation. Thank you for your listening.
Fidana, дуже дякую за таку цікаву презентацію.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. Indeed, mediation culture in a workplace helps prevent a lot of problems. This is a really valuable tool, and it's so useful, in my view, to be implement in Ukraine. Because after martial law is terminated, I think we're going to have a lot of conflicts in our society, including in the workplace environment. Therefore, implementing this culture, embedding this into the organizational culture will probably be a very efficient and swift mechanism for conflict resolution. That's interesting. All right. Allow me to hand over the floor to Sergii Savchuk. It would be right to say this is a like-minded person and a great friend of mine, and he represents the International Labor Organization. Just recently, Sergii and I, it was probably on Monday, we did press briefing where we were talking about how to train the trainers on labor mediation. And the focus is to train Ukrainian mediators to handle labor mediation cases as their dedicated subject matter, apart from family and other areas. I'm not going to be borrowing any more time from Sergii, so please, over to you. Dmytro, I want to thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants. Like they say in English, I feel so humble when I can see so many participants, over 500 people who connected and joined us today. to be able to listen to our panel discussion on labor mediation or workplace mediation, and I feel the burden of responsibility and understanding how important this topic is for the forum participants today. It is true to say that workplace mediation has been quite outstanding, and it has always been so. It's been important, but now it's getting very acute. Right. When Dmytro said that we are the like-minded people, it is so true. Our analysis demonstrates very similar findings together. We have a lot of coincidences and overlaps with things that you were mentioning earlier on about the potential growth of conflicts, especially after the end of martial law. Since right now, already today, we can see great transformations that are taking place in the labor market. They were caused primarily by the war, and millions of people were displaced both inside the country and outside. There is a great shift in the employment structure, there is a pressure on the economy, and all this triggers potential conflicts on the jobs. I'm sure they're going to be much more frequent, complicated, and much more emotional, obviously. I would like to share that the new challenges against the labor market are added to those legacy challenges that we'd had before the war began. And this is a great segregation in gender segregation in the labor market that we observe. We had purely female sectors and male sectors right now. Those boundaries are getting diluted. And there's a great scope and a lot of undeclared workforce, which would not allow for efficient solutions, for finding efficient solution to the challenges the labor market in Ukraine confronts. And there is also quite an obsolete legislative framework that we've been having for so many years, and lack of institutional capacity inside the labor administration framework. Now, once we talk about the challenges Ukraine has confronted with since the war began, Ukraine sees another challenge in front of it. This is just huge and immense reforms package that has to be implemented in line with our European integration processes. We're upgrading our institutions, building their capacities, approximating our legislation to the EU acquis. And certainly this inflicts reform in the social dialogue. That's why there's acute need for efficient tools that not only are going to resolve conflicts, but help prevent them through mutual respect and understanding. I'll dare to say and mention some of those tracks where we have been working comprehensively in our organizations. And some of the panelists already mentioned some of those tracks. This is the labor legislation reform. It has to be a real framework to foster sustainable recovery, economic growth based on the international norms and order. This is capacity building for institutions that would be able and capable enough to support economic recovery and boost economic growth. Building institutional capacity of the social dialogue actors who, through social dialogue, consultations and information sharing, as well as negotiating, may can make a potentially feasible contribution for every job, for every sector, for every region, and overall in the whole nation, and to be able to prevent conflicts and disputes.
We are now also improving the capacity of the court system. Courts are overloaded with work because labor disputes rank number 3 in terms of volume of cases that courts are hearing. It's a lengthy process, but it's important that the decisions rely on international standards. We often talk about prevention of labor legislation and effective response to violations that have already occurred by means of expecting, and unfortunately today the system of inspection is not doing their best, which only fuels the number of labor disputes that end up in courts. And of course, institutional support of social dialogue needs to be supported both at national and industry level, where parties believe it makes sense to resort to mediation. But labor disputes will continue into the future because labor sphere is a place where there are a lot of contradictions between employers and employees. Ambitions are high because it's not only economic activities, but it's also about social issues, and often dignity, self-respect, and other issues. And when passions run high, changes are constant in this sphere. All of this certainly has its impact and make this the area more conflict-ridden. So labor mediation in this context remains very relevant. In addition to the problems I have outlined, we also have challenges such as rebuilding companies, factories after the war, returning both vets and refugees back to Ukraine. We will have to create new jobs, adapt the existing legislation to the EU standards, and all of these processes will certainly be complicated by difficult negotiations and ridden with contradictions. And so here, it's important to understand that labor mediation is not just a tool, because mediation is a culture of mutual responsibility, ability to hear each other and build trust, no matter how difficult the conditions are. So it's important to relieve social tension, prevent strikes that exhaust conflict parties, and instead develop enterprises, etc. It is noteworthy that labor mediation is important not only in collective labor disputes, but this tool is actually much wider. It offers a much wider range of options. It can be used in whether it's rebuilding the enterprises on occupied territories. It is relevant everywhere where tension may erupt between an employer and an employee. Mediation is not just a compromise at any cost, but it's a solution that respects dignity of both parties. That's what makes mediation so attractive and strong, because it's about understanding the needs of the parties, and it's about attempting to find a common denominator. Alongside individual labor disputes, it is collective disputes that reveal systemic problems in labor relations that can be only tackled in a comprehensive manner. Collective labor disputes have clear procedures, and they reduce subjectivity and help avoid exacerbations and create conducive conditions for all workers, because decisions that are made within collective disputes are conducive for the entire staff. In conclusion, I'd like to say that it is the comprehensive approach to trouble shooting brought us closer to the national service of mediation and conciliation, and promoting the culture of conflict settlement. That's why we started to invest into professional and unbiased community. International Labour Organization, together with its International Training Center in Turin, organized certified training for labor mediators who became certified under the ILO certification program. And this is an important step toward creating a system that will work in an autonomous way in Ukraine. And it offers practical skills in negotiations, handling emotions of parties, and a lot of time was dedicated to modeling situations and practical analysis. This is part of a broader strategy of Ukraine for furthering human rights, and we continue to work with our partners. We work with trade unions, the government, Association of Employers, in order to enhance the skills of mediators. And of course, without the system of labor mediation, it is difficult to imagine the future of labor relations. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Sergiy, for a very interesting presentation and valuable information about standards of ILO and mediation at a workplace. And now it is my pleasure to give the floor to Sergii Bilenkyi, who was the member of the working group to prepare the bill on collective labor disputes, which envisages labor mediation. So, Sergiy, could you please tell us how employers perceive mediation at the workplace? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I thank the organizers for inviting me. It's a great honor for me. Today, we have mostly representatives of professional community who are well versed in these matters. A few years ago, I hardly heard of mediation. I thought it's something interesting, modern, but not particularly relevant for Ukraine. However, over the past several years, and thanks to Dmytro Kukhniuk and his service, which promotes the interests of professional community of mediators and the idea of mediation itself as a much needed element of labor legislation in Ukraine, I have changed my perception. When preparing for my presentation, I tried to structure the knowledge that I obtained during my work in the working group. So don't be too strict. If to someone representing professional community finds my information too obvious, but to me and perhaps some other colleagues present here today.
Перш за все, що я хотів сказати, чому взагалі питання трудової медіації актуальні для бізнесу. Сучасне корпоративне середовище характеризується багаторівневою конфліктогенністю.
Today's environment is written with conflicts. Therefore, differentiated approach is needed. Based on the latest research, a third of employees in the US believe that conflicts at workplace will grow. We also see that employees, especially mid-level managers, are less and less involved in decision-making process. Managers dedicate around 25% of their work time to conflict solving. And the effectiveness of this method is rather dubious. Having analyzed around 850,000 cases, shows that certain protocols need to be designed in order to tackle conflicts emerging in labor relations, which only emphasizes the need for alternative methods of conflict resolution. Let me dwell upon various methods of adopting mediation techniques to handle labor conflicts. Let's start with interpersonal disputes. They are mostly characterized by cognitive differences, differences in styles. And what mediation conflicts do we have? It's neutralizing the emotional exacerbation and promoting better dialogue. Speaking of systemic structural conflicts, they mostly stem from organizational dysfunctions, lack of resources, procedures, and here mediation focus should be focused on organizational changes. Now, collective labor disputes is more relevant to employees and employers. It's a much more complex phenomenon, and their specific features are legal regulation and serious economic consequences for all stakeholders. Now, what mediation strategies could be selected and adopted here? First of all, fast mediation for interpersonal conflicts can be used to shuttle diplomacy, and critical success factor here is identifying broad interests. Now, multi-session mediation is mostly used for structural conflicts and regulates and involves analysis of work processes, the structure of organization. Multifaceted handling requires more complex coordination, managing dynamics, asymmetric approach, and some effective package deals. Regarding adaptation of major principles, confidentiality in corporate sector is important and has certain gradations. For interpersonal disputes, there should be full confidentiality, limited confidentiality for systemic conflicts, and a customer-based approach on collective disputes. It is critically important to identify the range of mediation mandate and expectations of stakeholders for further steps. It needs to be in harmony with the organizational structure of the company as well. I tried to look at some success stories in labor mediation over the past several years, and I was pleasantly surprised because the successes that labor mediators have shown in settling labor disputes worldwide, they really impressive. And perhaps I can only tell you that effective system of corporate labor mediation requires multi-tier approach and trained mediators for internal, external for complex solutions, and critical success factor as a clear protocol.
Training in-house mediators should include not only basic training skills, but also organizational psychology. They must be aware of the labor law foundations, be competent enough to be able to professionally interact with professional teams. How can one integrate workforce mediation into human resource management in companies and organizations? This is quite a challenging issue. Mediation, however, must be integrated in a broader HRM infrastructure and conflict management. This is an early warning system, efficiency management, disciplinary procedures, onboarding interviews. The key principle is to position mediators and give them opportunities for growth. Mediation is not of punitive nature. One needs to track quantitative indicators and the percentage of successfully resolved cases, costs, and mediation quality assurance, which is going to retain good relationship inside the teams, is going to train people and provoke changes in organizational culture. Professional challenges for mediation development, including workforce mediation, they are the following in our view. This includes managing boundaries between HRM and mediation. There must be neutrality in the organization's hierarchy, adaptation to remote and hybrid work environment. Among the relevant current trends, these are digital platforms for mediation that expand access for diverse teams, AI solutions, which allows identifying the early warning and intervention needs, integration into welfare, and the staff has to consider mediation as one of the preventive measures. Competence-based culture becomes also eminent in national and international organizations and corporations. This requires trained mediators of the culture-based communication techniques and conflict management. When you consider the recent MIT's research in mediation, then in their experts' opinion, and if you take the findings, it's not yet developed enough, which creates more needs for comprehensive approaches employed. According to the Chamber of Commerce data in Ukraine, mediation can reduce the number of cases that are forwarded to the courts by virtually 60%. Time is up. And here comes the music. Thank you so much, Sergiy. I can see you have substantially come to today's presentation. And you have listed a lot of statistical data, which I want to thank you very much indeed once again. I am enrolling you right now to the team of like-minded people, like I already mentioned, because you contribute a lot to workplace mediation in Ukraine. Thank you. We have another panelist, and it is my pleasure to hand over the floor to Oleksandr Shubin, who, just like Sergiy, was part of the working group on developing the draft law on collective labor disputes. But Sergiy has already alluded to how a workplace mediation is seen by employers and businesses at large. Now we're going to hear the opinion of employees as trade unions that normally serve as their representation.
I had promised to speak English, however, I'll probably switch into Ukrainian because my colleagues and social partners speak Ukrainian today. Дорогі друзі, я насправді...
Dear friends, actually, I'm so impressed by today's forum. I would never even think and imagine that employers can think and have to think a lot about mediation in terms of human resource management. And Sergiy, who I know for so many years, I discovered the new Sergiy for myself because I now respect you even more. I'm so glad and happy to be here with you today. I understand our time is running to the very end of our panel discussion because Dmytro has been so liberal about the speaker's timing. I'm going to try to be more concise. Well, first and foremost, When this whole mediation story started evolving in Ukraine, I had been and continue to be one of those people who criticized mediation in terms of workplace disputes. And I'm going to explain to you, it was not just because we hate the situation when parties involve trained people, mediators, and can reach a common denominator and maybe find a solution that suits both parties. Why we do not like it? Most disputes in the workplace in Ukraine, especially interpersonal and as well as collective sometimes, they are all around the rights of the hired people and how they can enjoy them. In any civilized country, especially if this country is aspiring for the European Union, one needs to resolve problems by engaging all other tools that are provided by the state. Most conflicts in our case are around whether the employer works in full accordance with the law and collective agreements, both individual and collective. Normally, all the disputes are about pay. Our country still has indebtedness in terms of paying employees. This is now around 100 million euro. I just came back from Dnipro. This is one of the cities in southeast Ukraine, and you know they have one of the largest factories in the former Soviet Union. They have been producing rockets and missiles. It's not a secret. It's called Yuzhmash. And it's not a secret that this company has been suffering a lot from the enemy's shelling and attacks since the war began. But very few of you may know that they owe 3.5, they owe salaries for 3.5 years now, which means that their employees cannot enjoy their rights. Madam Alieva made a very good case about using mediation when resolving interpersonal workplace disputes between a young lady who was a hired staff member, and her employer. If I understand you correctly, the mediation fees cost 1,500 euro. And I tried to imagine myself to be like a coal miner who sometimes want to commit suicide at the premises of the Social Policies Ministry. This was the case probably 7 years ago. Or I could imagine myself being, let us pretend I am a steward in the Ukrainian international airlines. It doesn't really matter. Who had not been paid because the Ukrainian private airline bankrupted, or they went bankrupt. And I tried to sue the company, but it produced no effect to me. We know renowned case, Tymoshenko versus Ukraine in the ECHR, sorry. So apart from disseminating and promoting mediation, we need to do a good work in the judicial reform in Ukraine. So that like in the EU member states, just like in Scotland, where our first speaker comes from, we could not have only individual but also collective disputes. We want to make sure we build the system could cover only disputes regarding interest. Whenever we're talking about disputes between employees and employers about their pay, about the length of the working hours, compensations, additional bonuses, benefits, whatever, then only mediation services are going to be very important, especially in a country that is now surviving this horrendous war that is underway. We have regular staff members who, for the first time ever, had to take firearms in their hands and try to defend their nation from this injustice that Russia has brought to this nation. This is the threat to themselves, this is a threat to their children, and this has been extremely outstanding. And indeed, the mediation conciliation's role will be inevitably very important. I'm so happy that this dedicated service is now chaired by a real scholar, real practitioner, legal professional, and I'm really scared of those times when conflicts are going to be handled not through mediation, but through applying force. So I fully support mediation developments in the labor legislation of the country. Although I understand for every airline steward or coal miner, 1,500 euro would not be affordable. This amount can only be paid by an employer. But we're all aware that according to our traditions, if you order the music, then you will be dancing yourself. So you're in charge if you pay, in other words. I'm going to try to make it more efficient, emotional, just to add a little bit more powder into those absolutely correct and brilliant discussions that we've been having so far. And here's something I want to tell you. We, as trade unions, do understand the importance of mediation and the significance of its role. There are many multipliers who have been participating in the Torino seminar or workshop on behalf of trade unions, and we feel very comfortable that ILO is one of the driving forces of these processes, because this is a multilateral organization. They have so much experience in resolving workplace disputes for so many years for the benefit of sustainable growth. I want to once again welcome all the participants. Hopefully those couple of minutes that I tried to save during my intervention are going to be used for me to answer some of your questions. Thank you. Thank you so much, Oleksandr. So you're on my list of the like-minded people too, from now on. I'm so happy that from social partners, we have a lot of consensus regarding the importance of pushing workplace mediation forward in Ukraine, and I'm sure this is going to be very useful, especially once the war is over and we're going to be dealing with the national recovery. This is important to prevent conflicts in our war-torn society. Now we're going to have a bit of time for Q&A. We have 16 minutes to go. So please welcome. Whenever you have any questions, please go ahead, or you want to share a comment, please do so. Let me ask some of those questions that I've seen in the chat. Or if you want to ask a question out loud, you can raise your hands and wait until you're given the floor. But so far we have several questions already in the chat. I think there are 4 of them from one very active participant today. There are questions from other participants too, however. So we are going to go one by one. So we're going to take some of those questions, some of the most significant questions first, and we're going to choose first those that are more specific. But you never mentioned who you want to address your question to. So I'm going to just read out the questions, and then our panelists will decide who's going to take those. So the first one is, this is a question from one of our female participants. She asks, what should be done if after mediation, after a certain while, you get in touch with the parties and one of the parties claims that the other party never followed the arrangements? and never followed the commitments they agreed upon. Maybe this is absolutely relevant for the topic of our panel discussion, I mean, workplace mediation, and we're talking about labor conflict or workplace conflict. So who from our panelists would like to take this one, please?
I can take this question, if it's fine.
Yes, please.
First of all, I would understand the reason. I would ask specific questions. So why did it happen? Maybe some conditions for the other party who does not follow the agreements reached changed. And this is the reason. Also, I would maybe organize follow-up meeting with the parties if they are okay with this follow-up meeting. And as you know, almost in every mediation, parties have the right to come back to the process of mediation if some condition changed, if there are any changes that make them not follow the agreements that they reached. So first, as I said, I would understand the reason. Second, maybe a follow-up meeting would be helpful. And third, they can always come back to the mediation process and make some changes to the settlement agreement that they reached in previous mediation process.
Fidana, дякую за
Fidana, I'm sorry. Thank you very much for your answer. I hope our participant who asked the question is now satisfied. We have more questions. Maybe they're not quite to the topic, but there's a question, where can we see any announcements where they are looking for mediators? You can go to the National Mediation Association's website and you can find all the relevant information over there. There is another question. Can lawyers be trained as mediators free of charge in Ukraine? Is there any possibility like this? I'm not sure who from the panelists could answer this one. Maybe the moderator himself will do it. No, well, let me try. I think you need to keep looking for opportunities. There are mediation coaches, and they went to Torino to pass their training. And that was free of charge because the funding was provided by the International Labor Organization. There are other international organizations-led projects in Kyiv, or maybe will show up soon. I can see Sergei's hands raised. Please. Probably this issue has to be specified. Mediation training is good for anyone and everyone. Well, it seems to me, at least, that this is about building proper communication culture. This is about active engagement in conversations. This is about respect to the people you talk to. This way you can much better understand the needs and the requirements the other party may have, even though when the person is not saying that. So in any case, all those skills will be useful for everyone and anyone, like I said. Anyone who has worked for workplace relations or taking part in those, representing parties or interests of the parties. Or if you want to just grow personally in mediation, that's crucial.
Of course, we supported the course, the training course, certified course for mediators who have already showed experienced work, who have a rich portfolio, and this certified training was designed for mediators who are already qualified and experienced. Further Further training sessions are designed to someone who's starting from scratch and who wants to master the profession of a mediator. That's why these training sessions, and we have already reached agreement with our mediators, that these will be free of charge. However, jointly with our international center in Turin, we have designed a short introductory course, like an introduction to mediation, which we will adapt for Ukraine, translated into Ukrainian, and it will become available to anyone who is interested in improving their skills in mediation, and so that anyone interested could take this online course and get this symbolic certificate. How it will become available, we don't know yet, but we are discussing this right now. And the course that I mentioned earlier is a valuable course for trainers, experienced trainers, who will train mediators, which means we are expanding the cohort of mediators so that access to certified labor mediators becomes widespread and more readily available. Thank you. There's one question for Oleksandr Shubin. Did you have any cases of mediation in the armed forces of Ukraine? From what I know, from my colleagues in the Union of Defenders, these cases are quite numerous. I could give you more examples if it was a Ukrainian seminar, but it's an international seminar. So trade union representation in the armed forces of Ukraine is quite complex. We looked at it during the preparation of the new version of the law on collective labor disputes. We were saying that the military cannot participate in strikes, in protests, but they do have the right to have their unions outside their duties, whether there's command and control, and where there is no space for conflict. However, when we talk about social protection, support to their families, their rehabilitation, return to normal civilian life, here, of course, conflict are quite natural and can occur with local government, employers. And we must create conditions for these people in order to solve problems. And here the role of mediator is very important. And trade unions are already sort of mediators between employers and employees. Because even before the wave of protest erupts, it is best to prevent this through negotiation, through mediation. And it's easier to stir people and egg people into strike, but it's much harder to return people back to their workplaces with smiles on their faces. And so you can study mediation even at home, in your family, when talking to your family members, when talking to your neighbors, when talking to people on a bus somewhere, in a public transport, for example. Thank you, Alexander. There's one other question about how one can use mediation effectively to solve disputes between trade unions and management when the employees threaten a strike because management failed to raise their salaries. Dmytro, I could give you an example that is quite close to me and for Sergiy and for you. It's a collective dispute which took place, I think, in late 2023 at one of Dnipro steelworks. There was a real collective labor dispute, and eventually it may have erupted into Italian strike, doing all the work under strict shift schedule, which doesn't lead to effective work. So using capacity of your service, the staff, I don't think they got what they wanted. And I think they wanted 40% increase, but they did receive a 20% increase. And this is a good example of mediating using the experts of the service. Thank you, Alexander. Indeed, this is a success story of involving national service or mediation and conciliation when conflict was settled within 2 days, and both parties were satisfied by results of this conflict. There's one other question in the chat. It comes from an active participant. He has already asked 5 questions, but these questions are quite comprehensive. One question is addressed for me personally. I will leave it for last because it could sort of summarize our panel, because we heard answers to this question from what basically all participants of the panel were saying. But so let's first handle a short question. The questions addressed to other participants that concern budgets spent on supporting labor law. Some questions concern statistical data. You can formulate, because I understand you're a citizen of Ukraine, you can formulate your questions, and send your queries to employers and get answers. Now, here's the question. Will the mediation procedure effective in order to improve social dialogue in Ukraine? A very interesting question. Please, panelists, dear panelists, the floor is yours. I think I recognize the author of this question. I think we've met before. My opinion is yes, indeed. In order to improve social dialogue, mediation is suitable. And this is, in fact, applicable both at national level, local level, industry level, because during the war, of course, we are much concentrated on the difficulties of the war, because we have a lot of destructions, suffering of hundreds and thousands of people every day. The heroism of Ukrainian people is beyond doubt, but we need to pull ourselves together in order to overcome these challenges. Oftentimes, we lack strength and wisdom in order to hear each other. Therefore, Dmytro, I know you've been making great efforts, and I'd like to also address the employers and the government and the unions, trade unions. I think the unity that we were able to demonstrate throughout the war, and especially in the beginning of the war, later on we somehow lost this a little bit. People find it hard. So please, I'd like to urge on every one of you to join our forces and listen to mediator, because unless you listen to mediator, it's hard to agree. If you only listen to yourself, it's almost impossible to agree on anything and reach understanding. Thank you, Oleksandr. I don't think I have all knowledge and skills. Therefore, I also take courses on mediation. Make sure you attend all the courses. I see Tatiana Prelutska raised her hand. But we need to summarize our session because we already out of time. So please be brief. Tatiana, what is your question? I have a proposal. Since the number of conflict situations in public service, for example, is down, I think we need to modernize the legislation in order to decrease logistically the loopholes for the employer to abuse the situation. Because public service today has a lot of conflicts of interest, and here what could help is the change in legislation, particularly in the law of Ukraine on public service, in order to preserve the employers and employees. The provisions should also be revisited, and we need to lay the foundation to the legal framework of Ukraine and alter it accordingly. Thank you, Tatiana. Our service actively works with the National Agency of State Service, and we certainly get their advice when we try to improve the legislation and introduce changes. Thank you for your proposal. We will certainly take it into account. Now I'd like to give the floor to Sergiy Savchuk. Thank you. I'd like to return to labor mediation issues. I looked at labor disputes comprehensively, and I think we need to improve the full range of tools available to us. That might mean we may need to change legislation, and in fact, some of that work is already being done, and the Parliament is now considering one bill. We participated in drafting, in elaborating that bill. In conclusion, I would like to echo what Larissa Melnik mentioned, and that is the need for interaction, because we are trying to create an ecosystem to administer labor in Ukraine. Within this ecosystem, we need to interact between various actors, participants representing government institutions, trade unions, association of employers. And I think our participation in today's panel and the panel itself dedicated to labor mediation, certification of trainers, all of these are direct result of such interaction between the National Service, Ukrainian Academy of Mediation, National Association of Mediators of Ukraine. And this is a wonderful example of effective interaction, which shows very good results and makes us optimistic about the future. And we see what specific steps we could take in order to further improve the situation. And of course, we will try to develop this culture of interaction, of joint problem solvement. Thank you very much for a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sergey, for your inspiration. Taking advantage of my moderator status, I would like to answer the last question for this panel discussion. It's probably the question from the most active participant here. He already asked 5 questions. Some of them are worded the way that we're not going to have time to answer those, because even to read them, it is going to take another panel discussion. But at the same time, the question was asked to myself as the chairperson of our Mediation and Conciliation Service, and I think it's worth answering this one too. So, the question is, can you tell me if it's reasonable to introduce into our legislation, I mean, the notion of workplace mediator during wartime. We've already had the labor dispute resolution provisions, so we already have that in our legislation. Don't worry. So if organizers, with the organizers' permission, I'm going to try to answer this one. Why during the martial law? Because martial law is intended for the time when the law imposes restrictions on social protests and strikes. And we at our service consider this martial law, however difficult the situation may be in the country, this is still a window of opportunity to improve our legislation and get ready for those challenges that await for us after martial law is lifted, including in labor issues and around collective labor disputes. We need to prevent and contribute to conflict resolution. This is actually what we're responsible for. So martial law is considered as a window of opportunity for us to introduce improvements to the legislation to be much better prepared to the challenges that we are going to face after the end of it, during the post-war recovery. Why mediation as not intermediarship? Those processes seem to be similar, but I think they have substantial differences. According to the current legislation on labor dispute and conflict resolution, an independent intermediary is selected by the parties. And normally, this intermediary needs to suggest a solution to resolve or settle any conflict or dispute. In our services practice, right now, this independent mediation, intermediaryship is of very low demand because there is poor professional training and background of those independent intermediaries that they have. As a rule, this support is provided by our services staff members because they help parties find solution for their disputes. So even if there is mediation procedure introduced and the respective bill is passed, we're still going to have this support like it's done by our service today. And now, about the most important thing, why mediation? First of all, because the mediation procedure is governed by our law on mediation, and therefore this procedure is clearly structured. Secondly, mediation is done by independent professional mediators and not middlemen. This procedure as well is constitutional, which is an important safeguard to protect the interests of the parties. The mediation law requires to have a certain level of qualification for those individuals who deliver these services. And it's not an easy thing. It's very difficult to verify your status. You need to comply with a number of requirements by lifelong learning and personal upgrades. Mediators, unlike independent intermediaries, have to abide by certain ethical standards or codes of conduct. Therefore, they vary professional liability for breaching the standards. And last but not least, mediators in Ukraine, this has been an established community in the country. They've been already there for quite a while. And this process is based on, some of the participants already mentioned this, is rooted in the culture that has to be nourished. This is the culture that is based on values, and therefore, in order to keep developing this culture and embed it in our professional occupation, we have to take care of very many different sectors: workplace environment, family, and other cases. Hopefully, Sergii, who asked the question, hopefully you are fine with my answers. If you are not satisfied completely, I'm still open for the discussion at a later stage. You can come to me anytime. On our website, there is contact information. I'm going to be more than happy to continue this discussion with you in case needed. Okay, given we've already exhausted even more time than intended for this panel discussion, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. I'd like to thank all the participants and panelists for those extremely interesting interventions and discussions. And let me thank those participants. I can see there are fewer of them right now. Maybe they went for lunch. We used to have 520, now we have 471. Hopefully the discussion has been a great thing for everybody. Thanks very much to all those impartial people, and see you next time.